Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Sage. Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. So, I just did a video on the sonic booms, or we're just going to call them explosions, because I don't believe they were sonic booms. And in that, I told a story about a pilot who lived next door to me, a military pilot. And I would like to go ahead and tell more about this pilot. I've seen some interest in him in the comments, and this was an interesting guy, and their story is interesting, and my interactions with him are interesting, especially in the light of something that one of my viewers said in the comments that just blew my mind and made me get to thinking. So here's the story of the crazy military pilot that I once knew. So I believe he was in the Air Force. I believe that he was, I think he might have been a major. He had a silver maple leaf, I think. I can't recall. I do know at one time when I first met him, he referred to himself as captain. But at any rate, he flew an F-16. And he first showed up on the scene out there. Me and my sister had places right next door to each other, really, just like right across the road. And I used to hunt on her place a lot. And there was this clearing that was half on this other undeveloped acreage that I had permission to also hunt on, and half on my sister's place. And I had a deer blind out there. And this guy came in and he bought that land, and he built a house right next to my deer blind. Just totally ruined a whole season of deer hunting for me. So I kind of didn't like him for that. I mean, he can build wherever he wants. It's just, yeah. And he broke ground on the day before opening day. So I was just screwed. There was workmen all in there. The deer patterns were screwed up. Even hunting over at my place was just not going to happen. You know, all the deer went nocturnal. It was just, when people did that, it frustrated me. But anyway, side note, I digress. But this guy first shows up when they start breaking ground on the construction out there. And Thanksgiving came up, and he was staying out there with 3 of his oldest kids, 2 boys and a girl. And they were all teenagers. And I guess his wife was left behind at their other place. I think he moved from New Mexico to Texas. And she was home with the smaller children. I think 5 more little smaller kids. But his oldest ones were probably in their early teens. And they were stair-stepped for sure, all of them. And anyway, we invited him because they were camped out in a camper on this construction site. And we're like, do you have any place to go for Thanksgiving? Well, come on over to our house. So we had Thanksgiving at my sister's house. And she had the bigger home, and she was the one that did most of the cooking. And so we had Thanksgiving with this man and his 3 younger kids. And of course, being a preacher, that just always comes up. You know, it's just back in Texas, you know, if you're a preacher, people, you know, you talk about it. They ask you what you do. Oh, I'm a preacher. Oh, well, there you go. So, you know, being a preacher, one of the first things I say to people is, you know, hey, do you go to church anywhere? Or, you know, are you a Christian, or what do you do? You know, what's your bag? You know, what's your religious beliefs? And so he told me that they were Christians. And when he told me he had 8 kids, the first thing I thought was Mormon. They're Mormons. And his kids were real proper like that, like Mormon proper. I don't know if you've been around Mormons. I'm not dissing them at all. They have a great family structure, you know. Given enough time, they'll take over the world because they have a lot of children typically, especially fundamentalist Mormons. So, and Catholics have a lot of kids too. It's just part of the life, part of the culture. And so, you know, I just immediately thought Mormon. And no, he denied being a Mormon. And I said, well, you know, so what kind of Christian are you? You know, because he said they homeschooled their kids. You know, these kids were in that trailer doing their homework, doing their schoolwork, you know, and helping out around the construction site as well. And so, you know, I kept pushing him, and he never really would ever commit to, well, and I said, are you like charismatic or like Bible church or Baptist? And he's just like, no. You know, and I tried to get him to talk about what he believed, and he would always change the subject. So I believed that they were like I just thought they were some kind of, you know, in Texas, sometimes you get everywhere. Sometimes you get religious weirdos. And I kind of thought maybe they just had some weird beliefs they didn't want to talk about. But I will say this: once that house got built and his wife came out there, she and the children never left. They didn't go to church. They didn't go to school. He brought all the supplies in, going to and from work in a SUV. And he would go into work in Fort Worth, and sometimes he would be gone for 2 or 3 days, and sometimes it's during that multi-year period that we were neighbors. He left the country periodically. But I will say this, that on almost a daily basis, an F-16 flew over that house just high enough to be able to see good, and as slow as they could make the craft go. And you can almost make them things hover when you put on the brakes. So I thought it was always him until I know that he was deployed, and that she was over there by herself. And he did come by and ask us to help keep an eye out because he was going to be out of country for a while. And, of course, this was during the, Iraq and Afghanistan wars at their height. And, or at least at the very beginning. And so, but even when he was gone, that F-16 would still come over. And I saw him across the fence one day, and I asked him, before he was deployed for the long period, we had a conversation where I was like, hey man, can you explain why before you moved in here there was never any military aircraft over this area, and now we get buzzed on a daily basis by at least one F-16? And I saw a squadron of F-16s flying in formation over our property, and saw a F-16 peel off and go right over the top of that house and put on the brakes. So I know that he was watching his house. And so I asked him, I was like, hey man, can you explain why this is going on? And he's like, well, hey, I'm just keeping an eye on the place, just keeping an eye on things. And I said, you sure you're not keeping an eye on that woman? Because I was a little suspicious that he was keeping them so isolated. I just figured he was really jealous and controlling, And he just gave me this dead look, like mind my own business, and I nervously laughed, and we changed the subject. But on another occasion, after he had come back and I'd seen him in his pickup truck, and I knew he'd been deployed for maybe 2 months, a couple of months he'd been gone, and I caught him along the road and rolled down the window and flagged him down, and I said, hey man, I thought you this whole time were in Afghanistan. And he says, I have been. And I said, well then, how come somebody's still buzzing your house? You got a buddy that's is your buddy trying to cheat with your wife by flying over and checking on her? How many pilots does she have looking out for her? And he goes, no, man, that's just one of my friends, one of my people. I told him to keep an eye on the place. So, and in the previous video, if you haven't seen it, I told this story, and I'll briefly tell it again in maybe a little more detail. But one day there was a pickup truck out there when he happened to fly over, and I don't know who the guy in the truck was. There was rumors that maybe she was fooling around, and that's why he was so jealous. But I suspect it was just sometimes, people came out there to even ask if they could hunt on your land or whatever. People come down your driveway, even out in the middle of nowhere. And it always freak us out when it happened, But he just happened to be flying over on the day that this pickup was in the driveway. And this guy, he took this F-16 in, and he had the brakes on, right? And as soon as he saw that pickup, he shot straight up like this. He just went, whoom, and went in what was just a massive climb. Battery's low. And then he shoots. Excuse me, I'm going to plug in while I'm talking here. He shoots straight up. He does a couple of barrel rolls. And then he comes back down, swoops, flattens out, goes out, whips a Huey, and then comes back at a dead run straight towards the house. And he times the sonic boom to go off right over the house. And, of course, we got to feel that too, Literally, the dishes in the china cabinet rattled. Boom! And he went over the place, And he was always a curious guy to me. And eventually they put the house on the market, sold it to someone else from the neighborhood who had another place there. And they moved to Utah. And I never gave it much thought until my viewer brought up the fact that this guy was acting suspicious when you look at it in the concept of the cabal. And this underground child trafficking thing, I guess those 8 kids were his kids. The 3 oldest looked alike. I wondered about the younger kids because they looked very different than their older siblings. And they acted very strange. You know, I talk about good things about the old Marine, but I'll let you in on a secret. You know, the old Marine used to beat me religiously, like as a part of daily life. That he was always on the edge of his seat for me to do anything wrong. And when he could catch me at the slightest infraction, then he would just beat the tar out of me with a leather belt until he was winded. And in turn, whoa, it's falling off. In turn, I was a really good kid. Let me tell you, I was not like any other kid you ever met. You know, I was Mr. White Shirt, polished shoes, stand in line, march like a soldier. My dad was walking, I stepped where his feet stepped. As soon as I was big enough to do it, you know. And, I mean, I was trained. That's why I'm such a good assistant to pastors, because I was trained. And, you know, with the threat of, my dad had issues. He had some issues. And, but this guy's kids, this pilot's kids, man, they were all like that. Like marched in a row, like ducks, all sat down. I never ever had to even think about getting on to any of them. They were so well behaved, it was weird. Now, the kids didn't change. As far as I know, they were always the same. But I will say this, that one time his wife came over to my sister's house to swim in the pool in a really hot summertime and let the kids swim. All the little kids. Didn't bring the older kids, just the little bitty ones. And I talked to her, and it's the only time I ever spoke to her. And it was just small talk, you know. Talked about how beautiful the house was. Complained about how they screwed up my hunting. We talked about the weather. My sister was there. There was kids everywhere. My kids, my sister's kids. It was just, you know. And I didn't think anything about it. But after that, I never saw her again. And whenever he saw me, he always just gave me a dirty look. He kind of quit talking to me after that. And then about a year later, they moved away. But, you know, so they could have had other kids, because that last year or two, I don't think any of us saw any of those kids. The oldest boy every once in a while. One time he came over to let us know a cow got across the fence. But, so yeah, was this guy part of that cabal? He definitely was weird beyond belief. And very strange, and I thought he was religious, but maybe he was one of these Luciferians. Maybe them kids were all MK Ultra kids. Who knows? He was pretty high ranking. You know, he used to say, when I asked him about that, I often talked to him about, you know, buzzing the treetops because it was annoying. And, you know, one time he said, well, that's the benefit of being of high rank. You know, I can do what I want. I just tell him when we're out on maneuvers, I'm just like, hey, boys, I'm going to go check on the house. Nobody questions me. I don't have to file any flight plan. I can do what I want to, you know. And he held up his insignia, which, again, I think was a silver maple leaf. But at any rate, yeah, that's the story of this crazy pilot. Was he a part of the cabal? Were his children all being tortured right over in that big house and none of us knew about it? In retrospect, I wonder. Have a happy Thanksgiving, guys.